think about any industry in terms of its overall beneficial impacts on society. I challenge anyone to come up with another industry that has improved people's lives more than the fossil fuel industry.
My name is Mike Mauceli, and this is the Energy Show with REI Energy, where we're energizing your investments and maximizing your tax deductions. Today, we're going to be discussing utopian energy. And today, you will discover how one successful entrepreneur got sucked down the green energy rabbit hole and pulled himself out by discovering the reality of energy. My guest today is Brian Gitt. Brian is an energy entrepreneur, investor, and writer. Well, Brian, thank you for coming on the show today. And, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your story because I know you have kind of gone down this road of green energy. And of course, myself being in the oil and gas industry, when all of the green push took off here a couple of years ago, I was thinking to myself, well, if we're going to try to start doing some additional stuff, what forms of green energy actually make money? And today I haven't found a lot, even though you hear the government talking a lot about it. So I wanted to kind of get your background and how you got involved in the green energy side.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I wasted 20 years of my life chasing utopian energy. And so that is very much part of my story. And it all goes back to, when I was a teenager, I felt a really strong connection to environmental related topics and issues. I used to lead all these wilderness trips for teenagers in the outdoors, taking them on backpacking in Alaska for 40 days.
Oh, wow.
We do everything from backpacking, ice climbing, all this stuff. So I spent a lot of time in nature, and I just felt this connection with the natural world. I wanted to do something in my professional life to help preserve these areas that I cared about, that I had so much fun and recreation in. And that really sucked me into various environmental issues and causes. And when I stepped back and thought about, well, where can I make the most impact? It was pretty obvious that energy and the built environment is such a huge lever, right? Because energy permeates it's the foundation of civilization. It's in everything. And so that's what it's a very romantic idea to power society by the wind and the sun. I mean, it sounds great on the surface of it. I mean, and so that image, that romantic idea really stuck with me. I can still remember sitting in this classroom in northern Arizona when I was, probably 20 years old or so, and listening to Amory Lovin speak. And he's kind of a famous guy in the environmental world, and he was talking about how more sun hits the surface of the earth and more energy is there in 1 hour than we consume in a whole year. I was like, whoa. I mean, those kind of facts and ideas just blew me away. And unfortunately, my understanding and knowledge wasn't grounded in the physics and reality and economics. It was very much caught up in the fantasy. And it took many, many years, in fact, decades, to unravel that and really understand at a core level the importance of affordable, reliable energy and all the services it provides all of us.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And in fact, everybody around the world, everyone wants, good, reliable energy. And when you have, 3.5 billion people in other countries that don't have access to this reliable energy, I mean, it seems that a lot of these politicians, are trying to push all of these green energy policies. And the true fact is, I mean, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, right?
Well, it's even worse than that, because 47% of the people on planet Earth live in energy poverty. That's
Wow.
nearly half. That's 3.7 billion people don't have enough energy, things that we take for granted. We wake up, we have our warm shower, we flip on the light switch, we have a nice air conditioned or heated home. All of these things we take for granted. I recently wrote a book called In the Dark about this very topic of energy poverty, and I start off the book about a story of this 18-year-old girl, this Ugandan girl named Grace, and how she wakes up at 5 a.m. every morning in the dark. She lives in a small mud hut with her extended family. And the size of this hut is maybe an extended prison cell, basically the size. She walks for an hour every morning to Lake Victoria just to gather water so that their family can cook. And this life, there's over 700 million people on the planet that have live like that, zero electricity, live in a mud hut, no sanitation. They cook over a wood fire with wood or dung, animal dung, and they're breathing the effect of smoking two packs of cigarettes a day of wood smoke just by cooking and being in that hut. And so I think many of us that are lucky enough to live in the developed world, in the US and Canada and Europe and Japan, et cetera, we are losing touch with how billions of people in the world actually live. And although Grace's example might be on the extreme end of the spectrum, it is not uncommon. And there's a whole spectrum. And again, nearly half the people on planet Earth today don't have enough energy to meet their basic needs.
Yeah, it's amazing, that you said that, because I had my own personal experience. In the late '90s, we had a concession down in the Northwest Basin of Argentina, and we were drilling. We were actually drilling a well about 32 miles into the rainforest, and there was a village down at the bottom of the hill, and like you say, we take a lot of this stuff for granted, but we're sitting there during the day, and the electricity is kind of going on and off, all throughout the day, and we actually had some of the people there tell us that, people have actually died because they didn't have access to, sustainable clean energy. Sustainable energy, in order to create the electricity. And, they got most of their electricity from hydropower. And of course, when you have a drought, then you don't have the hydropower. So they actually had to, the priest come out and bless the well. We had the governor there of the province. I mean, it was a really big deal and you just don't realize how stuff like that goes on around the world growing up here in the United States.
Exactly. I mean, energy poverty kills about 10 million people every single year when you add up all of the other impacts of health impacts and all of the things that are related to energy poverty. And that's more than malaria, AIDS, and COVID-19 combined. I mean, if we woke up tomorrow, it would be the apocalypse, right? If you and I woke up in the same state that billions of people wake up every day around the world, we think it would be the end of the world. I mean, but for some reason, we're kind of immune to this and think that it's okay to promote more inefficient, less reliable, more expensive energy sources when most of the world doesn't even have enough to begin with.
So do you actually think these politicians like the Biden administration actually believe that we can get rid of fossil fuels?
Well, I think they believe four key myths that are very similar to what I believed and kind of was my own evolution of thinking over time. And the first myth I think they do believe is that fossil fuels are being phased out. They really do believe this, but we know that we're going to continue to need fossil fuels for transportation, industry, agriculture for many, many decades. In most of the world, fossil fuel consumption is increasing, not decreasing. Coal use is setting record highs in India and China and throughout Asia. We're seeing petrochemical demand skyrocket. It's going to be 50% higher in 2050 than today. The world will use more fossil fuels in 2050 than today. That's for absolutely certain. I mean, I don't see any other way around it because we're going to use at least 50% more energy around the world than we are today. And most of those people are not going to be able to afford solar and wind power. So in solar and wind power doesn't even apply to 80% of our energy use. It's just for electricity. Electricity is 20% of total global energy. So 80% of it, things that are powering our factories and industrial heat processes, and are the core ingredients and materials that make medical products and all kinds of millions of products that we use every day. Those you're not creating that from solar and wind power. I mean, those are coming from fossil fuels, and there's no scalable, readily deployable replacement in any cost-effective manner for these products. And so I think that's one underlying myth that they absolutely believe. The second myth that they believe is that wind and solar are going to be the things that replace this, right? Like there are other options, right? We have nuclear power, we have synthetic fuels, there's other possibilities, but they believe that these technologies, wind, solar, electric vehicles, are really the only path to replacing fossil fuels, which is not correct. Then the third myth is nuclear power isn't safe. right? The public perception around nuclear energy is somehow as dangerous when it is actually the safest. When you look at the data, it is the safest source of reliable 24/7 energy that we have in 70 years of commercial operation. And then the last one, and then I'll pause here, is this idea that using more energy damages the environment. So it's just the opposite. The more energy we use, the more we protect the environment. And the best example of this is in the developing world, because all of these people are relying on wood for cooking, for heating their homes. They chop down the forests. That's why you have the highest amount of endangered species in developing countries that don't have access to things like natural gas and propane and these fuels. So these fundamental myths are underlying President Biden's and other politicians' belief systems that are guiding these energy policies.
Yeah, and it's costing the American taxpayer billions and billions of dollars, right? Because they push these agendas. And why do you think these politicians don't like nuclear power?
I think it's shifting. We are starting to see a global shift around the world. A bunch of countries that were not in favor of nuclear have done a course correction. You know, you've seen this in Japan, right? Most famously, they had the Fukushima accident in 2011. They shut down all their nuclear power plants. Now they're turning them all back on, and they're talking about building more. South Korea, all throughout Europe, with the exception of Germany and a few places. But in general, we're seeing a radical shift towards nuclear. But there's still a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of ignorance out there. You know, there's really two things. If you boil down nuclear power, there's two things that the public cares about. What do you do about the waste? And what happens if there's an accident, right? I'm oversimplifying it, but those are really the two core fundamental issues. Well, first of all, nuclear waste, commercial nuclear waste has never harmed, hurt, or injured a single human being in 70 years of commercial operation. It's just sitting there. It's being stored in concrete, stainless steel lined casks. The radioactivity drops by almost 99% after 40 years. After hundreds of years, you'd have to eat it to cause harm. I mean, there's way more dangerous chemicals that we're dealing with storage today that pose a greater threat than nuclear waste. And it's a teeny amount. All of the nuclear waste in the United States, so for the last 70 years, nuclear power has generated approximately 20% of our electricity use in the United States. All of the waste from all of that time period could fit in one Walmart supercenter. That's all. I mean, it's a teeny amount, right? And we can even recycle it. And then on the accident side, there hasn't been any major accidents, for example, in the United States that have caused harm. 3 Mile Island, it didn't harm anyone. The amount of radiation, it was an accident. You never want to have an accident or kind of shut down or scare people, obviously, but there was no harm done. The amount of radiation that the people around that plant got is similar to me or you going to Colorado and going for a hike for a weekend in the Rockies. I mean, there was no public health impact, zero, much less anyone getting killed. So what are we talking about? I mean, all industry has accidents and death rates and things like that. This is one of the safest industries on planet Earth. So it's just an irrational fear is driving that kind of policy initiative.
Yeah, and I think that you get a lot of these politicians that don't really understand, the green energy push. I mean, everybody hears the word, right? I mean, as far as the all the news, all the mainstream media, everyone's trying to push this green energy because it seems like that's the word of the day or the word of the year, that we've got to move away from fossil fuels because it's destroying the country. But realistically, when it comes down to it, I mean, it is the cleanest, and it is the safest form of energy. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that here in the United States, the oil and gas industry is probably one of the heaviest regulated industries in the country.
It is. It is. I mean, I think there's such an ingratitude towards the fossil fuel industry. I mean, there's nothing in the history of civilization that has done more to lift people out of poverty, to improve our quality of life, to improve our health span, our lifespan, all of these things. And yet somehow we vilify in the culture, at least in the United States, we vilify fossil fuels, like that these companies are somehow plundering the environment and poisoning people when In fact, it's the opposite. I mean, there's think about any industry in terms of its overall beneficial impacts on society. I challenge anyone to come up with another industry that has improved people's lives more than the fossil fuel industry. Yeah, that doesn't mean they're perfect, obviously. Every industry has some bad actors, every industry has some accidents, some negative aspects of it. But on balance, when you look at overall, when you weigh the costs and benefits, the benefits far outweigh any costs.
Yeah. So these are the Obama administration, and of course the Biden administration. I mean, they're throwing all this, our tax dollars, at all of these, green projects. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about how your story went and how you got kind of sucked into the green energy deal?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was on the front lines of this in California, which is kind of ground zero and for a lot of the green ideology and policy initiatives. So in 2009, right after the financial crash, the federal government in the Obama administration decided that let's put people back to work, create jobs, let's pump billions of dollars into the energy sector. Let's get workers back into retrofitting homes and businesses and factories and making them more energy efficient, et cetera, which, I mean, on the surface, it sounds good, right? I mean, having more energy efficient buildings is not a bad thing.
Right.
Putting people back to work isn't a bad thing. The problem is when you have these top down central planning kind of policies, they have so many unintended consequences. And I was so my firm at the time, I was the CEO of a energy consulting firm who was working with dozens of local governments and the utilities in California. We were the prime contractor that was implementing many of these programs. Today, that program is called Energy Upgrade California. It's still around. So we were helping to administer rebates to basically upgrade the insulation in your home, the heating and air conditioning system in your home, putting in better windows, basically just making homes more energy efficient. So we were training contractors, we were doing quality assurance, we had new financial products to offer low-cost financing, offer rebates. We did a lot of consumer outreach and education. We did all that stuff. And what we saw on the ground was all this money was being pumped in. Again, the original goal was to create jobs and to cut energy use, right?
Right.
But what ended up happening is most of these comprehensive energy retrofits are expensive. Like to replace your heater or air conditioner or do a whole house retrofit and replace windows, you're talking sometimes 10, 15, even $20,000 to do that. Well, who's going to do those projects? Well, first of all, you got to own a home, right?
Right.
If you live in an apartment, you're not going to do that. So that means already you're going to segment out. It's mostly homeowners, and it's mostly affluent homeowners that already had the money, that were already likely going to be doing these projects anyway, because they need to replace their water heater, they need to upgrade their heating and air conditioning system. And so they were taking advantage of a lot of these rebates and incentives, but it wasn't actually basically driving customers, especially lower middle income folks, to do these things because they still couldn't afford to do it. So it had huge benefit for wealthier homeowners and not much benefit for lower and middle income families. So what are we actually doing here? We didn't create nearly the amount of jobs or energy savings that the government had aspired to hit. And at the end of the day, in my view, is a huge waste of money. I mean, we did well, and other consulting firms like us, we made a lot of money doing this. So, I mean, in some ways, I shouldn't bite the hand that feeds me. I mean, a lot of people will criticize me today saying, oh, you promote fossil fuels or nuclear. Why don't you promote renewables, et cetera? It's like, well, I did that for 20 years. I promoted energy efficiency renewables for 20 years. What I saw on the ground running these programs is they don't scale. They're not cost effective. And ultimately, they're not going to deliver the energy savings in the clean energy that we want, right? Because that's the goal. I mean, I think when we zoom out, we can all agree on two things. We want to help people live better lives, and we want to improve the quality of our environment. No one wants to drink dirty water or breathe dirty air. We all want that. So it's just, what are the best technologies to get us there?
Well, when you got people like John Kerry and, running around the country and says we need to get rid of all coal today, we're not going to burn any more coal. Biden's out there saying we got to get rid of our gas stoves, we got to get rid of our hot water heaters, we got to get rid of our ceiling fans. You saw what Obama did to the dishwasher industry. I mean, going from the amount of gallons that you use, it almost takes two washes to clean your dishes, or you have to wash them prior to putting them into the dishwasher now. So I don't see how a lot of these initiatives will save us money.
No, and also the net zero policies that the whole world right now is aiming at is a death sentence for lower income folks in developing countries. I mean, because again, energy is the lifeblood of modern civilization. If you don't have energy, you don't have healthcare, you don't have education, you don't have all of these basic sanitation services. So when we are basically not financing, there's the European Investment Bank, the World Bank, these entities are starting to crack down and not finance critical energy infrastructure projects in places like Africa or in parts of Asia. And they're telling them they're selling false hope that they should just be investing in renewables. By the way, they're also not investing in the renewable projects either. So we're basically leaving them in energy poverty because we're saying we don't want to finance your fossil fuel projects, but we also don't want to finance the renewable projects because they don't make economic sense. So ultimately, what we're telling you is have fun staying poor, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically the message. And this is a real problem because it's dangerous. This is killing people. Energy is a matter of life and death. It's not just a nice to have. And until we wake up and realize the implications of these policies, we're aiming at the wrong goal. Instead of net zero emissions, imagine this. What if the world had international conferences and policies to increase energy consumption by 500%? What if that was the goal, right?
Yeah.
We would shrink our environmental impact overall because we know that more energy consumption in cleaner technologies ultimately do that in terms of land use, materials used, waste, all of those things. And we would lift up billions of people out of energy poverty. China did this. So in 1990, China had like a 70% poverty rate. I mean, most of the population lived in abject poverty. And in about 30 years, they went from 70% to less than 1%, right? Living in poverty. That is a radical trend. How did they do that? They increased their energy consumption by 500% through a combination of using fossil fuels, industrialization, and free trade. That's how they did it, right? It wasn't certainly the communists centrally planned top down cramming it down. I mean, it's because they opened up and embraced parts of capitalism and free trade that enabled them to do this. But at the root of it, it required 500% more energy use. So what if the world took this goal on? What if instead of net zero energy by 2050, 500% more energy by 2050? And we will naturally climb up the ladder to more energy dense fuels. We stopped burning wood because coal was better. And then the developed world started burning natural gas because it's better than coal. And then we started building nuclear. We will advance. We will go up that ladder of energy density and using cleaner burning fuels. So it's just a matter of building the economic capability to do that.
I've talked to a lot of people that have wind, turbines on their property, and of course, going out to West Texas, I think Texas is one of the largest, wind has one of the largest wind farms or as many windmills as a lot of other states here in the U.S. And I was fortunate enough to fly on a plane with one of the accountants that actually oversaw one of the largest wind projects in Texas, and we were talking, and he was telling me that it doesn't actually make money. I mean, obviously it's subsidized by the government, and of course the electric companies. I mean, they can increase your electricity, and I know our electric rates here in Texas have gone up about 25% in the last 2 to 3 years because we've embraced a lot of this green energy. So it doesn't seem to me that it's saving us any money, as we continue to put in these solar farms and the green energy, as long as they're subsidized by the government, right?
Yeah, the late Charlie Munger has this famous quote, "Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome." This is Warren Buffett's partner. And, I think it's very apt here because Yeah, there's a lot of people making a lot of money on building these wind farms in Texas because there's all of this subsidy in tax credits to do that. But they're doing that on the backs of the American taxpayer, right? This is purely an arbitrage play to get federal subsidy to basically get return on capital ultimately. But it's eroding the reliability of the Texas grid. And anywhere you have significant penetration of renewable energy on the grid, we're seeing an erosion of reliability and resilience of and quality of the energy on those grids. And ultimately, not only the taxpayer and middle income families are getting screwed twice. Number one, it's basically that's where our tax dollars are going to subsidize these things. And then second, it's increasing the cost of energy for your average family because the intermittency, complexity is expensive. When you have to manage and design a complex system, it is much harder than a simpler system. And injecting chaos into the grid of all of this intermittent renewables, it increases costs to manage that variability because you still need all of the baseload power because you don't know if the wind is going to blow or not, right? In Texas, just about a year ago, when the grid was stressed to the max in the middle of the summer, the total wind capacity was only at 3% of the installed base. So imagine you spend billions of dollars on building all these wind turbines and all these solar panels. And then when you need the power the most, it's not there. What that means is you basically have to run two redundant power systems. You still have to have all of those thermal power plants, but now you've eroded the economic viability of those plants because you're forcing their capacity factor, the amount of energy they produce over the course of the year, way down because you're prioritizing wind and solar in the grid. So you're making it harder and harder to operate a thermal power plant cost effectively, and therefore eroding the quality overall of the energy that consumers are getting because it's going to be less reliable and more volatility is going to be present on the grid.
That's amazing. Well, look, Brian, I really appreciate you being on the show today. And I know you've been on PragerU, which I follow them very closely. And can you tell our listeners how to get a copy of your book and where they can kind of follow your work?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that surprised me most about writing this book in the dark, and I wrote it so that people could basically sit down in 1 hour and kind of distill all these ideas into a really short, easily digestible read. It has hundreds of sources, et cetera, but you can go to briangitt.com, BRIANGITT.com to get it. And one of the most surprising things about this is what we're seeing is because we've made it really cheap. I don't make any money on the book. I'm doing it just to spread the word and change the energy narrative. We have lots of people that are buying like 10 of them or 12 of them to give out to their friends and their work colleagues. I have this guy that goes to a coffee shop and just hands them out to people. We have some energy executives that have gotten 50 copies to give out at their keynote speeches at conferences. It's great because it's a very inexpensive book, but it distills down all this complexity into a very digestible bite-sized chunk. So go to briangitt.com to get that, or you can follow me. I'm very active on, I guess, what formerly Twitter, which is now the X platform. And it's just at Brian Gitt. And I try to share as much knowledge every day as I can. Any new trends, any new data, any new information. So those are the best places to find me.
Wow. Thank you very much. And I'd love to have you back in the future.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to The Energy Show with REI Energy. Energize your investments and maximize your tax deductions. To learn more, go to reienergy.com.